Hi, I'm Deanna Joe, and welcome to my channel, Responsible Faith. If you haven't watched the first video in this series, you probably should. Otherwise, none of this is going to make much sense to you. But I sent a letter to David Bernard, the General Superintendent of the United Pentecostal Church International organization, which he received on December 16th, 2022. And my letter was reporting one of their licensed ministers, Reverend John Wesley Grant of Madison, Wisconsin, for allegations of failing to report multiple cases of sexual abuse under his pastorate over the years. And this goes back decades. And then the subsequent promotion of those abusers into ministry while shaming and ostracizing the female victims. And in the first video, I read my letter, and so now I will read the two letters I included with mine, as well as one that I submitted a week later through email. And I am reading these letters with permission. So the first letter I'm going to read is Debbie's letter, and some of you remember, you've probably followed Debbie's story. She has her own blog, Surviving Church and Childhood, and she has her own YouTube channel, but she has been a guest on this channel numerous times. And so she is a sexual abuse survivor of the Madison Church. And I'm just going to read her letter. She wrote, "David Bernard and members of the General Board, I am writing this letter in support of all that Deanna Joe has written. It cannot be overstated to say that my abuser, Stephen Dahl, John W. Grant, Calvary Gospel, and the UPCI have become the monsters of my childhood on into adulthood. As recently as a couple of years ago, John Grant was still slandering my name and characterizing me as a loose child. This seems unprofessional, he is a bishop, and unchristlike to me. When I heard he was saying these things to his family about me, it broke my heart. At age 11, when my abuse started, I was a very devout child, nothing like the slutty girl he has proclaimed me to be. There appears to be no compassion or concern for me or my salvation coming from this bishop. I never received any love, compassion, or support from my pastor or from any of the other leadership. To put it into perspective, I was still playing with dolls when Steve started to abuse me. I was not capable of seducing anyone. Steve Dahl stole my childhood, and John Grant drove the getaway car. Steve Dahl made it very clear to me that he and John Grant are friends. He says that John Grant has forgiven him and that many UPCI people still socialize with him. I, on the other hand, was shunned after I came forward and branded a seductress. Like all of the other survivors of CGC, I was thrown away and labeled a troublemaker, while predators have gone on to be loved and protected. One could argue that John Grant is no longer in a pastoral role. That being said, his legacy looms large over the Wisconsin district, and he has installed his son into the pulpit. You would be wise to investigate all of the leadership within CGC. Some of the current leadership has survivors in our group, and I'm sure there are countless silent victims. The reason so many of us do not wish to report using the system you have created is manyfold. I, and we, feel the UPC is run like a business, not like the family of God. The UPCI seems more interested in protecting its brand and reputation over caring for the well-being and salvation of survivors. You speak to us in legalese and do not seem to care about our individual circumstances. I was taught early on that the church did not care about me, and this is why I have no faith in this process. Since coming forward, I have sent an open letter to the church in hopes of bringing peace between the church and the survivors. I also reached out to David Bernard personally. In both instances, no care was shown to me or the other survivors. It really solidified my belief that the UPC has not changed since my childhood. My grandma always told me when I was a little girl, someday, when we stand before God, we will be held accountable for all the lives we touched. She said we must witness to everyone and love them, lest we be held to account. I feel compelled to ask you, how will you face God on Judgment Day? How will the UPCI answer for all the children abused under their leadership? All of the girls you never protected, according to your belief system, are most likely lost. And as a leadership body, you appear to be okay with that. Lastly, I would have to ask what I have asked over and over. Where is your heart? Debbie McNulty. The second letter was submitted by Sabrina, and Sabrina attended that church and really had no idea that there were predators in the congregation because it was never made public. Nobody ever said anything. So this is her letter. To David K. Bernard, the UPCI, and whom it shall concern. In 1995, just shortly after my 18th birthday, for the first time, I walked into the doors of Calvary Gospel Church in Madison, Wisconsin on a Sunday morning. That was the very first time I ever heard Pastor, now Bishop, John Grant Sr. preach a sermon. He was the district superintendent for all UPCI churches in Wisconsin. The congregation was around 100 to 200 people. I had a husband and one son over a year old. Growing up in a small town in the United States, I had attended other churches such as Catholic, Lutheran, and Methodist. I attended preschool and public school. I had babysitters. I had teachers. I participated in parks and recreational activities. I was always under the impression that things like physical abuse, sexual abuse, or neglect were not legal in any of those places. It was clear there was legal authority through things like social services, employment requirements, etc., that made the importance of a child's health and safety in those public areas a priority. That is not to say that nothing bad ever happened, but to say that if so, there were clear consequences. When my first son was born, I was still a minor, and because of that, I had a legal and also moral responsibility for his care. I had to allow things like social services to visit my residence. If I were ever to hurt my child or show any signs of abuse or mental instability, he could have been taken away, temporarily or even permanently, if I did not comply with specific rules and regulations by law, no matter what my religious or moral beliefs were about it. I was also responsible for making sure that any time I was to leave my son in the care of another person, such as daycare, that he was in safe hands. If I were to find out that he was not, there were legal steps I could take to deal with that, as well as legal steps the child care is required to take should they suspect or see that my son was not safe with me at home. So when I walked into CGC that day with my son, there were hundreds of people and designated areas in the church with Sunday school teachers, nurseries, etc. I just assumed that my son, not yet old enough to talk beyond a few words, was safe in their hands. If not, I knew there were things I could legally do about it, and if they, like the daycare, were to suspect that he was not safe with me at home, they too could take action. In 1995, I was finally legally an adult. I no longer had to abide by any unhealthy relations I had with my biological family or my legal guardian. But you see, even though the world around me had some protections, in my childhood home there was drug and alcohol addictions. There was physical and mental abuse and a lot of toxic cycles that had been passed from previous generations. I was determined to break those cycles, to be a better parent than mine were, and to be a good person. So in CGC, where I witnessed how guests are welcomed as if they are already family, where everything appeared to be joyful, healthy, exciting, and honest, I, of course, thought if there's a true family of God, a true church with good people, surely this is it. They accept me, they actually pray with thought behind what they say, they speak from what I thought then was ancient references, and I had a lot of emotions flooding my heart. Now, although no human is free of mistakes and no church is perfect, and to expect such is not reasonable, I did spend approximately 5 years at CGC. I completely dedicated myself to living for God, where it was not just a religion to me, but it was a lifestyle. I attended and later taught Bible studies. I worked in street reach ministry. I was very active in the choir. I helped with childcare, fellowships, events, but above all, I was an active participant in every service possible. And every single day and night, I sought to live for God. My husband at the time and I had 2 more children, one of which I named after one of my favorite disciples from the old King James Version of the Bible, that I was told to be the truth. During that time, of course, I noticed imperfections. Of course, I had things I repented for every day and people I prayed for every day, and I understood the pressure that it takes to be a leader. But I truly loved everyone as family, and I really believed that Pastor Grant was an honest man, and the most godly man I had or would ever meet in my life. He was humble and would not hesitate to talk of any errors and judgment he made. He would pray and cry for us. He struggled with bodily pain. His wife was always kind. Even after leaving the church, which I did not do because of the church, but because my marriage was ending, I still would tell so many people I would run into in life that should happen to ask about God, that Pastor Grant was the most godly man I knew, and that CGC was the most Christian church I'd ever been to. I considered myself backslidden because I still believed in Jesus the way I had been taught there. When social media began to become more available and utilized, about 10 to 15 years after leaving CGC, I had a Facebook account. I searched for many people that were from the church. I also came across a group that was for people who had left a UPC church, and I joined that group and found a few people that I knew. I began to observe their experiences, as well as to observe the experiences of those still a part of CGC. Occasionally, I would see someone speak about multiple abuses that had occurred in UPCI churches, even some ministers who had ended their lives. As I said, at that point, I still believed in the church, so when I say abuse, I do not mean just some harsh words or the typical banter of back and forth that every relationship has. I mean rape, sexual assault, pedophilia. I mean child abuse, not just a spank on the butt or a mild slap on the hand. I mean treating children who have likely not even gone through puberty fully yet as if they're capable of deciding on intimate relationships. I mean incest, abuse of authority, lack of compassion, taking from the poor constantly to support the rich. And though that was disturbing, I still did not find blame toward the entire organization. At the time, I never ever imagined that any of those things could have possibly occurred at CGC. I remember there were very strict rules that I was always led to believe were followed, and that I assumed appropriate consequences were established for. I thought the UPC always abided by the laws of the land, just as any professional organization. So when I heard about Steve and Glenn, which I am quite aware that you have also heard about, it is no exaggeration to say I was absolutely shocked and horrified. I instantly contacted my ex-husband and children, who by then were mostly adults, to ask the very serious question as to whether they knew of or had themselves experienced any form of abuse. I had in fact met Steve, even though he does not preach at a UPCI church anymore, twice while attending CGC, once at a conference and once while he took pictures for the CGC church phone book because he worked for Olin Mills. I had also heard Glenn preach many times. I had participated in fellowships at his house. Not one time was I told to be careful around these people with my children. Not one time was I told that in the spaces where I trusted my children to be in safe hands, there might be people who had been accused of abuse. Not so long later, I began to question the people I had reestablished contact with from CGC, asking them if they knew. And for the first time, many of them began to verbally harass me, troll me, fearmonger, and make up fake accounts to stalk me after being blocked, sending rude messages and deleting them right after I would read them. I never thought I would see this type of behavior or defensiveness from people who I once believed cared for me, or at least my soul. I also witnessed them doing the same to literally everyone who spoke out. The other thing they would do is more like shunning. Since CGC has services available to view online, and at first just on audio, if we caught them live, there were horrendous things said about us. Prayers that we would be damned, that we would drown in a well, calling on the congregation to stalk our accounts, verses about Jezebel aimed toward us. For the replays, they would delete these things, and eventually they stopped recording or live streaming during parts of the services. When we would share or post the articles and information in the hopes that the congregation would be informed, with the hope they would decide on resolutions to protect innocent children and stop enabling an environment where abuse is allowed to flourish, posts would be deleted or spammed. It seems to me that all of that served absolutely no purpose under God whatsoever. There have been many times when I've seen you yourself allow questions and posts to either be abruptly deleted on social media or followed up with passive-aggressive comments. And I must be honest, I do not have a lot of faith that your intention behind requesting information from those who have spoken up is to, in fact, use the platform you stand upon with authority to make long overdue commitments to separating the UPCI from the same traditional cycles and roots of abuse that have been proven to exist within the Christian community for multiple generations. Still, even though I no longer believe in what you do, I will always believe there is hope. I know that one person is capable of creating a ripple effect. I know you have to have noticed by now from the articles, reports, and testimonies that there are indeed guilty parties involved in horrendous acts that are most definitely not according to the book you preach from or the foundations the UPCI claims to stand upon. So, I have hope that perhaps these letters will speak to you loudly enough to inspire you to prove us all wrong when we say we are losing all hope that the UPCI will ever change or be anything less than yet another massively destructive cult. Below are some verses that I believe tell you the same. 1 Peter 2:13, submit yourselves to every ordinance of man for the Lord's sake, whether it be to the king as supreme, or unto governors, as unto them that are sent by him for the punishment of evildoers, and for the praise of them that do well. For so is the will of God, that with well-doing ye may put to silence the ignorance of foolish men, as free, and not using your liberty for a cloak of maliciousness, but as the servants of God. Proverbs 12:22, lying lips are an abomination to the Lord, but they that deal truly are his delight. Galatians 4:16, am I therefore become your enemy because I tell you the truth? Mark 9:42 says, and whosoever shall offend one of these little ones that believe in me, it is better for him that a millstone were hanged about his neck and he were cast into the sea. Amos 5:12, for I know your manifold transgressions and your mighty sins. They afflict the just, they take a bribe, and they turn aside the poor in the gates from their right. And then this last verse, which is so powerful in my opinion. Ecclesiastes 4:1. So I returned and considered all the oppressions that are done under the sun, and behold the tears of such as were oppressed, and they had no comforter. And on the side of their oppressors there was power, but they had no comforter. Sincerely, Sabrina Reynolds. And so those were the two letters I included with mine. And then about a week later, I think it was around December 23rd, Laura sent me this one to include from her and her husband. And so I will read that. She wrote, "Dear Mr. Bernard, this is a letter we wrote to John and Roy Grant and posted on Debbie McNulty's blog 3 years ago. We don't have the emotional strength to go over it all again in order to rewrite it as a letter to you. They have brought such trauma to our family. Please accept this as a summary from us in your investigation of Calvary Gospel Church and John Grant in Madison, Wisconsin. Thank you, Dan and Laura Anderson." So this was the open letter she included, and it was captioned, "An open letter to Roy Grant and John Grant." This is mostly directed to John Grant, since you were the pastor when we were at Calvary Gospel Church. There is a lot I'd like to say, but I will make this brief. It was 1.5 years ago when we discovered the betrayal. Up until then, we trusted you, believed that you were a good, decent man, and were dedicated to protecting those under your care. We now know how terribly wrong we were. Let me take you back in time. Approximately 27 years ago, we were in a meeting with you and two couples who held the title of elders and the associate pastor. A police officer in uniform who was a member of the church but not an elder was also present. We were told that our minor daughter, who had recently moved in with her dad, had become involved with an older married man in the church. We were crushed and broken to hear this. If you remember, we had gone to you on several occasions asking you to help in keeping him away from her. We also asked your wife for help, as well as going to this man directly. Eventually, the older married man convinced her that he was going to give her a wonderful life where they would travel and see the world, painting a very enticing picture in the eyes of a teenage girl. After years of being groomed, she gave in at the age of 17. He was in his mid-30s. At the meeting, we were told that our daughter and this man would both have to go up before the church to confess their sins and promise to change their behavior. She was kicked out of the youth group and Calvary Christian Academy. During the meeting, one of the elders told us to be thankful we weren't living in the Old Testament times because our daughter would be stoned. Another one of the elders sneered if the parents would live right. We felt we were being kicked in the face by people who we thought would love and support us during one of the most horrible moments in our lives. This brings us to you, John Grant. I remember you saying to us, "I have to report this. I'm not going to jail for a fornicator." You also said, "You leave everything to me as far as the man involved goes. You just see to your daughter and we will take care of things." We trusted you and took you at your word, believing that a police report was being filed. You stated the need to do this while the uniformed officer was standing next to us in the meeting. Fast forward to around January 2018 when we heard about Debbie McNulty, who came out with her experience at CGC concerning being molested as a young girl. She opened the door for others to step out and share their experiences. We were told that you were informed about similar situations back when they were happening, but never contacted the authorities. It caused us to reflect on how our situation was handled, and eventually we decided to contact the police and inquire about the report you filed concerning the married man from CGC who preyed on our daughter. Imagine our shock when the police told us there was no report. We felt betrayed. This was when the church Facebook page started to receive reviews from those who were harmed under your watch and those of us who supported them. Can you imagine how they felt when they were called troublemakers, liars, and bitter by the church members? It opened a lot of people's eyes to the ugly truth about Calvary Gospel Church and those who were involved in leadership. Your church soon took the review section down. We write this to warn other parents to please beware. It is our opinion that you should use caution with who you trust your children to at CGC. Protect them. If anyone lays a finger on them, do not trust leadership to handle the problem. Call the police. From what we understand, many innocent people have been hurt and many of the guilty have been protected. John Grant, we ask that you become the man of God you claim yourself to be and make things right for these survivors. We would like to see you apply your teaching notes on ministerial ethics to yourself. We want to know why you didn't do what you were supposed to do, what you said you'd do, and what was the right thing to do. Roy, you're in a hard spot. Most of this didn't happen under your watch, but you have the power now to do what is right and for any current situations that might be happening at CGC. We ask that you protect the innocent and admit to any wrongdoing if need be. Please do what is right. We beg you, Dan and Laura. And so she added a little part underneath because that open letter was written in 2019. And she said, Mr. Bernard, since then we have read a police report filed in Sun Prairie, Wisconsin, where Roy handled a sex abuse case in the same type of way John Grant did. There is so much we have seen in the over 30 years we were involved in the UPCI. Deanna Jo read a letter from us on her YouTube channel that tells more. We hope you will take the time to listen to it. Sincerely, Dan and Laura Anderson. So those were the letters I included with mine, and can I just say how impressive those letters were? I put it out there in the survivor community that I was just looking to include any letters that any survivors might want to submit, and I felt like we ended up with 3 very unique perspectives. You know, you had one survivor's parents, and then a woman who came to that church, had no idea that this stuff was going on, but she felt upset when she found out because as a mom, you know, she did not realize how careful she should have been with her kids at that church. You know, you don't want to unknowingly expose your child to a dangerous environment. So I applaud these people for their courage. You know, I think their letters really painted a clear picture of the situation at Calvary Gospel Church. And when David Bernard received my whole packet, I sent it registered mail, international registered mail, which included my letter, my resource pages, plus 2 of the 3 letters I just read. He immediately called me, like that day. And for the sake of time, I will talk about that conversation in the next video, as well as the fact that I talked with Lisa Reddy of Safe Church, and just kind of whatever followed after that. I actually originally set out to make this a 3-part series, but I'm dividing it into 5 parts to keep the videos from getting too long, because there's a lot of information here. And I hope you will watch, because I feel like this was a significant case for the UPCI, and that the outcome kind of set a bit of a precedent because of the age and status of the minister involved, as well as the amount of time that had passed since these cover-ups happened. You know, hopefully this will hold some of their ministers accountable who have deeply wounded and ostracized, abused people in the past. And also that it will serve kind of as a warning shot for any of their current ministers when situations of abuse arise in their churches. You know, handle it properly, or else you could be reported and reprimanded by the UPCI. People are more empowered to report these things now, and it's good to have that layer of accountability there. So if you enjoyed this video, you can like it, share it, and if you would like for YouTube to notify you whenever I post a new one, you can hit the subscribe and the little notification bell, and they will do that. So thank you for watching.